The African dawn began like a slow drumbeat, deep and steady. First came the thin line of light above the horizon, then the swelling tide of crimson that spilled across the savannah. The air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of red earth still damp from the night, mingled with the sweet tang of dew-heavy grass. Marcus Hammond pushed open the creaking wooden door of his hut, its hinges groaning like an old memory. In his hand, an empty enamel coffee mug, chipped at the rim, stained from years of mornings just like this one. He stepped onto the porch, his boots pressing softly against the planks, and let the first breath of the day fill his chest. 10 years. That's how long he had lived out here on the edge of the Masai Mara, far from the crowded cities and polite conversations he no longer trusted. 10 years of waking with the dawn, of walking the same dirt tracks until they felt carved into his bones, of recording footprints in the sand, and listening for sounds most people never noticed. He had seen elephants mourn their dead, hyenas steal from lions, and vultures circle patiently until the world gave them its scraps. He thought he had seen it all, but that morning was different. It began as nothing more than a flicker in the corner of his vision, a shape moving against the stillness. He turned his head slowly, his senses sharpening as they always did when something felt off. Through the thinning fog, a golden figure emerged. Low, fluid, deliberate. A predator. Marcus's pulse leapt before his mind even named it. The rosettes on the coat, the muscular shoulders, the way the tail flicked like a whip. Unmistakable. An African leopard. The hunter of hunters. Instinct screamed, "Step back, retreat, get inside." But his feet stayed rooted to the ground, as if his body already understood something his brain hadn't caught up to yet. Because she wasn't stalking. She wasn't crouched or ready to spring. Her steps were heavy, unsteady, burdened by something more than hunger. Then the fog shifted, and Marcus saw what she carried. Clamped between her jaws, limp and bloodied, was a leopard cub. The tiny body hung awkwardly, one foreleg dangling at an impossible angle, the shoulder matted with dark red where flesh had been torn open. Only the faint, uneven flutter of the cub's chest proved life still lingered. Marcus's breath caught, and for a heartbeat, the entire savannah seemed to hold still. The mother came closer. 20 meters. 15. 10. The porch creaked under Marcus's weight as he leaned forward without meaning to. His every nerve screamed danger, but his eyes could not leave hers. Amber. Brilliant, burning, unblinking, and not the eyes of a killer. Not this time. They were eyes carved from grief, from desperation, the eyes of a mother on the edge of losing everything. She stopped just short of the porch and lowered her head. With impossible gentleness, she set the cub down on the weathered boards. A broken cry slipped from the cub's throat. Weak, pitiful, almost human in its fragility. Then the mother stepped back, her muscles tight, her gaze never leaving Marcus. And in that silence, the message was as clear as if she had spoken. "Save my child." Marcus felt the weight of it press into his chest. All the rules, the training, the instincts that had kept him alive in this land screamed against what he already knew he was going to do. He should have shut the door. He should have called the Rangers. He should have done anything but move closer. But instead, he set the mug aside, knelt down on creaking knees, and whispered, "It's okay." The cub's breath rattled, shallow and uneven. The wound was savage, the mark of a male leopard's jaws, the cruel pattern Marcus had seen before, nature's ruthless way of forcing a female back into season. The little body trembled beneath his gaze, caught between death and survival. And in that instant, as the sun broke fully across the horizon and painted the porch in firelight, Marcus understood. His life was no longer his alone. It had just been bound to this broken creature, and nothing would ever be the same. Marcus pushed the door open with his shoulder, his arms wrapped around the frail bundle of fur. The cub was lighter than he expected, terrifyingly so, its tiny heartbeat thudding weakly against his chest as though time itself was slipping through his fingers. The old hut smelled of cedarwood, dust, and coffee grounds. But now it carried something new, the raw metallic scent of blood. He laid the cub on the wooden table by the window, where shafts of early sunlight cut across the room in golden stripes. The fur around the shoulder wound was slick, red layered over tawny spots, clotted in fresh blood mingling like ink and water. Marcus's hands shook as he fumbled open a drawer. The first aid kit clattered onto the table, scattering gauze and antiseptic bottles across the scarred wood. For 10 years he had cataloged animals, measured paw prints, written reports for people thousands of miles away. But never had he felt the weight of one fragile life pressed so firmly into his hands. He grabbed the satellite phone and dialed with clumsy fingers. Each ring dragged like an eternity. Finally, a gruff voice broke through the static. "James here." Marcus barely recognized his own voice as he explained. "Leopard cub, wounded, bad shoulder, losing blood." There was a pause. Then James's tone shifted from casual to clipped, professional. "Listen carefully. Clean the wound. Stop the bleeding. Keep her warm. Give fluids if you can. I'll call Sarah. She's the only one close enough to help. She'll be on the road in minutes. 1 hour. That's what James said. An hour until Sarah could get there." Marcus's stomach clenched. The cub didn't look like she had an hour. Outside the hut, he caught a glimpse through the window. The mother leopard still on the porch. A golden shadow crouched low, her amber eyes fixed on the door. Waiting. Trusting. Marcus swallowed hard and bent back to the table. "All right, little one. Stay with me." He soaked a strip of gauze in antiseptic and pressed it to the wound. The cub flinched weakly, a whimper catching in her throat. Marcus murmured nonsense under his breath. Words he didn't even hear himself saying, just a rhythm to fill the silence between her shallow breaths. He wrapped her in his flannel shirt, tucking the edges tight to trap what little warmth her small body still carried. The kettle still held water from his morning coffee. He poured a little into a tin cup, stirred in honey from the jar he'd bartered with the rangers, and drew a few drops into a pipette. Holding her head steady, he let the liquid touch her tongue. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, faintly, she swallowed. A drop, then another. Her throat moved with the smallest, stubborn motion, survival refusing to quit. Marcus's chest ached. His heartbeat matched hers, a drumbeat against the quiet room. Then, cutting through the fragile silence, came the distant growl of an engine. Marcus froze, listening. Tires crunched against the red dirt road. The sound grew louder, closer, until dust plumed outside the window. A Land Rover. Sarah had come faster than expected. He exhaled a shuddering breath. Relief, sharp and fragile, surged through him. But another thought struck just as quickly. Sarah would have to get past the leopard. And outside, the mother stirred, rising from her crouch as the vehicle rolled into view. A sentinel preparing to judge whether these humans were worthy of the trust she had already risked everything to give. The Land Rover skidded to a halt in a swirl of red dust, its headlights still glowing in the weak dawn light. Marcus's heart hammered. He glanced through the window, hands still hovering over the cub, and saw her. Sarah Quinn, field medic and wildlife rescuer, climbing out with her canvas bag slung across her shoulder. She had worked with lions, patched up hyenas, even darted rogue elephants. But nothing had prepared her for the sight waiting at the edge of Marcus's porch. The Leopard Mother had risen from her crouch. Golden and black rosettes shimmered in the dust. Her body was still, her head lifted, ears forward, amber eyes blazing with a warning that made the air feel thin. Marcus cracked the door just enough to see. "Sarah," he whispered hoarsely. "She's right there." Don't move fast. Sarah didn't flinch. She adjusted the strap of her bag, her every movement deliberate, as though she were moving through water. Her blue eyes locked on the leopard's. "I've heard stories," she murmured, barely loud enough for Marcus to hear. "But I never thought I'd see it." The leopard's tail lashed once, twice. Marcus felt the tension coil in his gut. Any wrong move, and this fragile truce would shatter in blood. Step by step, Sarah moved closer. 10 meters. 8. Her boots pressed softly into the dirt, her free hand slightly raised. Not in threat, but in acknowledgement. Her tranquilizer rifle remained slung across her back, untouched. She would not break this unspoken contract with violence. The leopard didn't move, didn't growl. She simply watched, judging. Finally, Sarah reached the porch. For one impossible moment, predator and human stood less than 3 yards apart, and nothing happened. No snarl, no charge, just silence. Then, Sarah exhaled softly and slipped inside. She shut the door with a careful click, her face pale, her breath controlled only by sheer discipline. "Marcus," she said, her voice hushed but steady. "That cat trusts you. Don't ask me how or why, but she chose you." Marcus stepped back from the table as Sarah moved forward, pulling gloves over her hands, unrolling sterile gauze, setting out vials and syringes with the precision of a battlefield surgeon. She bent over the cub, her face set in calm focus. "Male leopard attack," she diagnosed instantly. "Shoulders torn, could be infection. If we're lucky, the bone isn't shattered." Marcus hovered, wringing his hands. "Can you save her?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She slid a needle into the cub's flank, delivering antibiotics in a swift, sure motion. The cub twitched weakly, her tiny cry barely audible. Sarah stitched with speed and care, her hands moving so smoothly it was almost like a dance. Bandages wrapped the wound, sealing in what little strength remained. At last, Sarah sat back, her eyes weary but determined. "She's got a chance," she said, "but only if she makes it through the night. Infection, shock, blood loss, any of them could take her." Marcus pressed his palm against the table beside the cub, close enough to feel the faint tremor of her breath. Outside the window, the mother leopard hadn't moved. Her amber eyes glowed in the fading light, unblinking, eternal. "She knows," Marcus whispered. "She knows we're trying." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a small, tight nod. Maybe. Or maybe she's just out of options. But either way, she's watching. And she won't forgive us if we fail. As the sun dipped low, turning the sky to molten red, the room was swallowed by long shadows. The cub lay swaddled in the shirt Marcus had given up, her breaths shallow but steady. The oil lamp flickered to life, casting fragile halos of light against the walls. And in that fragile silence, the house became more than a hut. It became a sanctuary, a battlefield, a prayer. Tonight would decide everything. Darkness folded over the Masai Mara like a heavy cloak. Beyond the thin walls of the hut, the savannah pulsed with its nightly rhythm. Crickets chirring, hyenas whooping in the distance. The low cough of a lion carried on the wind. But inside, everything narrowed to the flicker of a single oil lamp and the fragile rise and fall of the leopard cub's chest. Marcus hadn't moved from the table in hours. His hand hovered near the small body swaddled in his flannel, fingertips brushing gently over her head every few minutes, just to feel the warmth, just to be sure the little heart hadn't stopped. Each breath the cub took was a battle. Each shudder a reminder of how thin the line was between life and silence. Sarah had gone, back to her camp to gather more supplies, promising she'd return by morning. "If she makes it through the night," she'd said quietly, "her chances rise." Marcus clung to that phrase like a lifeline. If she makes it through the night. Through the cracked window, The mother leopard's eyes gleamed in the dark like two molten embers. She hadn't left her post. Sometimes she paced the porch, her massive paws silent against the wood. Sometimes she crouched, head low, muscles coiled. But always watching, always listening. Marcus found himself speaking into the stillness, not sure if he was talking to the cub, the mother outside, or himself. "You're stronger than you look, little one. Don't give up now." The kettle on the stove hissed softly. He poured warm water into the cup, added a spoonful of honey, and drew a few drops into the pipette. Lifting the cub's tiny head, he let the liquid touch her lips. For a moment there was nothing. Then a faint movement, her tongue flicking weakly, a swallow so fragile it nearly broke him. Tears stung his eyes, unbidden. Hours dragged like years. The lamp guttered low, shadows lengthening across the walls. Each time the cub stirred or let out a weak cry, Marcus jolted awake from the edge of sleep, heart pounding. He murmured reassurances he didn't believe, promises he had no right to make. Outside, the night deepened. Hyenas laughed closer now. A single roar rolled across the grassland like thunder. Marcus's pulse spiked, but the mother leopard remained unmoving, a silent sentinel who dared anything to approach. Finally, just before dawn, the sky began to pale. A thin silver light seeped through the window, touching the table where the cub lay. Marcus leaned closer, breath caught in his throat. The rise and fall of her chest was stronger now, still shallow but steady. Her eyes flickered open, faint amber sparks peering into a world she'd nearly left behind. A sound escaped Marcus's throat, half laugh, half sob. "You made it," he whispered hoarsely. "You made it through the night." The door creaked softly as he stepped outside. The mother leopard stood at the edge of the porch, her golden coat glowing faintly in the first light of day. Their eyes met once more, man and predator, bound by something beyond words. "She's still alive," Marcus said, voice cracking. "And I think she's going to make it." For a long moment, the leopard didn't move. Then, with infinite grace, she closed her eyes and opened them again. A slow blink, a silent nod. And in that wordless exchange, Marcus understood. This was trust, fragile, unlikely, but real. The battle wasn't over. But for now, they had won the first night. 3 days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and stubborn hope. Marcus barely left the hut, except to fetch water or gather firewood. Every hour circled back to the table where the cub lay, swaddled in blankets, her breathing no longer desperate, but still fragile. Each morning began the same way. The rattle of medicine bottles, the sting of antiseptic, the trembling precision of wrapping and unwrapping bandages. The wound was deep, the shoulder torn badly. But Sarah's careful stitches held. Her instructions over the radio were crisp and relentless. Antibiotics every 12 hours, fluids every few hours, keep her warm, watch for fever. Marcus followed them like scripture. The cub responded in tiny, defiant ways. The first day, her tongue flicked weakly at the drops of honey water. The second, her paw twitched when Marcus cleaned her wound, a faint hiss escaping her throat. And on the third morning, her eyes opened wider, clearer, not just dulled with pain, but alive, watching him with an alertness that made his chest ache. Outside, the mother leopard never left. By day, she lay stretched in the dust just beyond the porch, her rosetted coat blending into the savanna grass. By night, she paced, a golden shadow in the lamplight, her low growls drifting through the hut walls whenever hyenas wandered too close. She hunted in brief, frantic bursts, returning before dawn with the scent of fresh kills still clinging to her fur, as if unwilling to stay away for more than moments. On the fourth morning, Marcus noticed a change. When he touched the cub's injured leg, she didn't just flinch. She hissed, soft but deliberate. Not a sound of weakness, a warning, instinct returning, the fight of the wild creeping back into her blood. Sarah arrived in her Land Rover, dust rising in a cloud behind her tires. She entered the hut with her usual quiet efficiency, setting her bag on the table, checking the wound with gloved hands. Her brow furrowed. "She's healing," Sarah said. "But I don't like the way the shoulder feels. Could be a fracture. Might need an X-ray." Marcus felt the weight of those words sink into him. A leopard that couldn't hunt wasn't a leopard that could survive in the wild. To live meant freedom. To stalk, to leap, to kill. Without that, the cub's life would become a shadow of what it should be. "The station has equipment," Sarah continued, "but it's 2 hours by road, and she won't understand why we're taking her away." Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the mother leopard's golden gaze burned back at them. "And I don't think her mother will, either." Marcus turned, heart pounding. The thought of lifting the cub, carrying her out in a transport box while those amber eyes followed every move, it felt impossible. How could you explain to a wild mother that this was her only chance? That the gamble of leaving was the only way to save her child? The mother leopard rose as if she had heard the unspoken question. She stretched, her muscles rippling under golden fur, and stared straight into the hut. Sunlight poured across her rosettes, outlining her like a figure carved from light and shadow. Marcus whispered, almost to himself, "How do I tell her?" And in that silence, with the weight of 2 worlds pressing in, the wild and the human, the rules of nature and the stubborn hope of compassion, he realized that some choices would never come with guarantees, only trust. The metal transport box sat open on the floor, its cold frame out of place in the warmth of the hut. Marcus hated the sight of it. To him, it wasn't just steel and hinges. It was a barrier, a wedge between mother and child. Yet without it, there was no way to get the cub to the ranger station alive. He worked slowly, moving with a kind of reverence, wrapping the cub in a fresh blanket before lowering her into the padded carrier. The cub whimpered softly, a sound that sliced through his chest. Her amber eyes fluttered open, fixing on him with something that felt like both fear and trust. Marcus whispered, "Easy, little one. Just hold on." Outside, gravel crunched under Sarah's boots as she circled to the truck. Through the window, Marcus saw the mother leopard stand. She had been lying beneath the shade of the porch, but now she rose with a fluid, menacing grace. Her muscles rippled, her ears flicked forward, her whole body drawn taut like a bowstring. When Marcus stepped out carrying the box, the air changed. It felt heavier, charged, as though every particle of dust and light was watching. The mother's eyes narrowed, fixed on the box that held her cub. She moved alongside Marcus, never more than 10 feet away, her head low, her tail twitching. Not attacking, but not allowing distance either. Every step to the vehicle was a negotiation. Marcus's heart pounded with each footfall on the dirt. He kept his voice low, a steady murmur, not for the cub, but for her. "I'm not taking her from you. I'm trying to bring her back." The leopard's ears flicked at his tone. She didn't retreat, didn't lunge. She simply shadowed him, stride for stride, until he reached the back of the Land Rover. When the box was secured inside, Marcus hesitated. He looked at her, at those amber eyes lit by the morning sun, and felt as though he stood on the thin edge of something sacred and dangerous. He whispered, "Trust me." The leopard stopped then, only a few feet from the bumper. She lifted her head, holding herself tall and proud, her gaze burning into him with a weight no words could carry. Then she sat, not relaxed, not at peace, but poised, a sentinel carved in gold and black, watching as the vehicle roared to life. The drive was brutal. The dirt road bucked and jolted, every rut sending vibrations through the carrier. Marcus sat twisted in his seat, his hand pressed through the bars, feeling the cub's faint warmth, his own stomach tightening with every bump. Sarah drove hard, her eyes locked on the winding track, dust billowing behind them. Neither of them spoke much. The silence was thick, broken only by the roar of the engine and the occasional soft cry from the cub. Marcus's thoughts spun endlessly. Would she survive the ride? Would the mother still be there when they returned? The ranger station came into view at last. A cluster of low buildings painted in fading green, a radio tower stabbing at the sky. Outside, 2 rangers waited with a stretcher, their faces grim but ready. As the vehicle screeched to a halt, Marcus's hands tightened on the carrier. The cub was still breathing, still fighting. But the hardest part had only just begun. The air inside the ranger clinic was sharp with disinfectant, a jarring contrast to the earthy scent of the savannah still clinging to Marcus's clothes. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the cub was lifted from the carrier and placed onto a stainless steel table that looked far too big for her small, trembling body. The veterinarian on duty, Dr. Colonzo, a man with tired eyes and steady hands, wasted no time. He ran practiced fingers along the cub's injured shoulder, frowning as he felt the uneven line of bone beneath torn muscle. "Fracture," he muttered. "Clean break through the scapula. She'll need a pin. And soon." Marcus hovered at the edge of the room, every instinct urging him to stay close, though the staff had told him to keep back. He could only watch as the cub was prepped, furs shaved, wound cleaned again under sterile light, monitors attached to track the fragile rhythm of her heartbeat. Each beep of the machine echoed like a countdown in his chest. Sarah rested a hand briefly on his arm. "They know what they're doing. Let them work." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the same fear that was eating at him. The anesthesia mask lowered over the cub's tiny muzzle. Her eyes fluttered once, then closed. Marcus's throat tightened. He had seen many creatures die in the wild. Sudden, brutal, uncompromising. But watching this young life slip under in the hope of survival felt like walking a razor's edge. The surgery began. Metal tools clinked. The steady rhythm of suction, the sharp smell of cauterization, the surgeon's quiet instructions to his assistant. 2 hours stretched into an eternity. Marcus paced the waiting room, every creak of the floor beneath his boots louder than the chatter of the radio on the desk. Sarah sat at the window, arms folded, gaze distant, as if she were silently holding the cub in her thoughts. When the door finally opened, Marcus spun so fast he nearly knocked over a chair. Dr. Colonzo stepped out, his mask pulled down, fatigue written across his face. For a heartbeat, Marcus feared the worst. Then the vet gave a small, weary nod. She pulled through. The bone is set with a pin, the wound closed. She'll be sore, and recovery won't be simple. But she has a chance. Marcus's knees nearly gave way with relief. "Can I see her?" "Briefly. She'll be under close watch tonight." In the recovery room, the cub lay curled in a small cage, her side rising and falling with the slow rhythm of anesthesia. A brace encased her fragile shoulder. She looked impossibly small against the white sheets, but alive. Still here, Marcus pressed his fingers to the bars, close but not touching. "You're still fighting," he whispered. Outside, through the high clinic windows, the sky was shifting toward dusk, streaked with the same red he had seen the morning she arrived at his porch. Somewhere beyond those walls, the mother leopard waited in silence, unaware of the battle fought under surgical light. And Marcus knew tomorrow would bring another trial, not just healing, but the moment he would have to face her again, to explain in a language without words that he had not stolen her cub. He had given her back the possibility of life. The next morning broke pale and cold, the kind of dawn that carried no warmth, only light. Marcus barely tasted the bitter coffee Sarah pressed into his hand before they loaded the cub back into the transport box. She was awake now, groggy from anesthesia, but alert enough to lift her head, the brace on her shoulder making her look both fragile and stubbornly alive. The ride back was quieter than the one before. Every bump in the road still made Marcus wince. But this time, there was hope stitched into the silence. The cub had survived. She was on the other side of the knife, her breaths steady, her eyes brighter. Yet as the Land Rover rumbled into the clearing by Marcus's hut, a hollowness opened inside him. The porch was empty. No golden rosettes blending with the dust. No amber eyes burning from the shadows. The sentinel who had guarded through the night was gone. Marcus climbed out slowly, his stomach tight. He half expected her to step from the tall grass, muscles taut, tail lashing. But the yard remained still, save for the wind brushing through the acacia trees. Sarah glanced at him, reading the tension in his shoulders. "Maybe she gave up," she said softly. Maybe she thought the cub didn't survive. The words cut deeper than Marcus expected. He carried the box inside, the cub shifting faintly against the blanket, and set it back on the wooden table where this battle had begun. The room felt different now, fuller and emptier at once. He stared at the open doorway, at the absence that pressed like a weight against his chest. That night was the hardest. He kept the door ajar, the oil lamp glowing, the cub curled against his side. Every sound outside made him lift his head, straining for a shape in the dark, a glint of amber eyes. But the porch remained vacant. He whispered into the silence, "She'll come back. She has to." But dawn arrived with no sign of her. Only the cub, brighter-eyed, stronger, chewing clumsily at a strip of ground meat Sarah had left. And Marcus realized a new truth, settling in like a stone. The mother leopard had not abandoned her cub. She had entrusted her. In giving the tiny life into his hands, she had crossed the oldest boundary in the wild and walked away with nothing but faith. It was a trust so absolute, so unfathomable, that it frightened him more than any predator ever had. The hut settled into a new rhythm, one Marcus had never imagined for himself. Morning light spilled through the shutters, not onto his scattered field notes or coffee cup, but onto the blanket where the cub now stirred. Her name came without thought. Nia, Swahili for purpose. It seemed right. Every movement of hers, every breath she fought for, gave his days a sharper edge, a reason to rise, to keep going. Work shifted. Reports and research logs piled in corners, while his world shrank to the table, the floor, and the steady ritual of care. Gauze changes twice a day. Antibiotics with trembling paws held steady in his hands. Droplets of water coaxed onto her tongue. And then, slowly, meals of ground meat she learned to lap with growing hunger. By the end of the second week, Nia tried to stand. Her legs wobbled like a fawn's, her injured shoulders stiff. But she managed 3 shaky steps before tumbling into Marcus's boots. He bent to catch her, laughter breaking from his chest like something long buried. The sound startled him. He hadn't laughed in months, maybe years. Outside, life on the savannah moved as it always had. The mother leopard never returned. But Marcus left the door cracked each night, more out of respect than hope. The emptiness on the porch still pressed heavy, yet it was no longer grief. It was acknowledgement of a bond given and accepted. Word of the leopard cub spread quickly through nearby villages. First came whispers. A man raising a leopard in his hut. Then came visitors, curious elders, children peeking from behind their mothers, rangers bringing extra supplies. Suspicion softened into respect as they saw Nia's progress. Around campfires, her story grew into something more. The tale of a wild mother who had chosen a human when no one else could help. Researchers arrived too. They carried notebooks, cameras, endless questions. They wanted to explain what Marcus knew in his bones, had no easy explanation. Leopards did not bring their young to humans. They did not sit on porches through the night. Yet this one had. And in that choice lay a mystery beyond biology. Marcus kept his distance from the cameras, but he let them record Nia's first true roar. It came one afternoon when a bird landed on the porch railing. She crouched, shoulder brace and all, then let out a sound that was more squeak than growl. But it was wild. Pure instinct breaking through weakness. The researchers smiled. Marcus felt something deeper. Pride. By the third month, Nia's limp was noticeable, but not limiting. The scar across her shoulder stood out against her spotted coat, a reminder of the night that had nearly ended her. Yet she moved with growing grace, her eyes sharper, her muscles filling with strength. The hut echoed with her mischief. Pawing at boots, knocking over water pails, pouncing on shadows with reckless joy. Marcus knew the truth he had been avoiding was drawing close. Nia couldn't stay here forever. She belonged to the grasslands, the riverbeds, the whispering acacia trees. And when the time came, he would have to let her go. But not yet. Not while she still curled against his boots at night. Not while her amber eyes still searched for him every time he left the room. For now, their lives were bound together. Two unlikely companions sharing a fragile miracle, the kind that the wild, in all its brutality, rarely allowed. By the time the rains came, Nia was no longer the trembling bundle Marcus had first lifted from the porch. Her coat gleamed in the sun, her muscles rippled when she leapt at moths or stalked shadows along the hut walls. The brace was gone, replaced by a faint limp that barely slowed her, and the scar on her shoulder had faded into a mark of survival, a line of story written into her golden fur. But with her strength came restlessness. Marcus saw it in the way she paced at the doorway, her tail flicking, her ears pricked to every rustle outside. She crouched at the windowsill, amber eyes fixed on gazelle herds grazing in the distance. Her body coiled with an instinct no human walls could contain. Sarah noticed it too when she visited. Standing by the porch one afternoon, she watched Nia stalk the tall grass just beyond the yard, her movements already mirroring her kind. "She's ready," Sarah said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "Keeping her here isn't saving her anymore," Sarah continued. "It's holding her back." He knew she was right. Every fiber of his being knew it. But letting go felt like tearing away a part of himself. For months, his days had revolved around Nia's survival. Her breath, her hunger, her pain. All of it had become the measure of his world. The thought of silence filling the hut again was unbearable. That evening, after Sarah left, Marcus sat at the table, Nia curled on the floor beside him. The lamp flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. He whispered, "You were never mine to keep, were you?" Nia lifted her head, blinking at him with eyes that seemed to hold an ancient knowledge. Then she yawned, stretched luxuriously, and laid her head back down, as if to say she understood. The reserve was the only answer. A stretch of semi-wild land, carefully protected, but free enough for Nia to grow into the predator she was born to be. Not captivity, not the loneliness of cages. A chance. The morning of departure came too soon. The vehicle idled outside, its back prepared with a larger carrier lined with blankets. Marcus knelt by the old flannel where Nia had first slept. She pawed at it, her body restless, sensing change. "This isn't goodbye," he murmured, stroking behind her ear where she loved it most. "It's just the part where I let you be what you're meant to be." When he lifted her into the carrier, she didn't resist. She crouched low, eyes alert, body tense but trusting. As the Land Rover rumbled to life, Marcus caught movement at the edge of his vision. A shadow among the acacia. His breath froze. There, just for a heartbeat, golden rosettes rippled through the grass. The unmistakable silhouette of a leopard, the mother, She didn't approach. She didn't call. She only stood, watching, as though to witness this moment. To see her cub taken toward a new chapter. Marcus's throat tightened. He placed his hand against the carrier bars, feeling Naya's warmth one last time. Then he looked back at the trees. The mother was gone, melted into the savannah as silently as she had first appeared. The Land Rover rolled forward, dust rising in its wake. The hut grew smaller, the porch empty, and Marcus sat in the passenger seat, silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew then, love, whether human or wild, was never about holding on. It was about letting go. The drive to the reserve wound through miles of red dirt road and rolling grassland. Marcus barely spoke. His hand rested against the carrier bars, feeling the steady rhythm of Nia's breathing as the Land Rover jolted over ruts and stones. Beside him, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the track ahead, giving him the silence she knew he needed. The reserve wasn't marked on any tourist map. It was a hidden stretch of land managed by rangers, semi-wild, with thick brush, acacia groves, and a spring-fed creek running through its center. A place where predators could learn again what it meant to live free, without cages or crowds, but still with a watchful human presence should disaster strike. When the vehicle finally stopped, the world seemed to hold its breath. Birds wheeled high above. The grass shifted in a low wind. Marcus climbed out slowly, circling to the back. Sarah lowered the ramp, her movements calm, practiced. Marcus unlatched the carrier door. At first, Naya stayed crouched inside, her body tense, her amber eyes wide with the overwhelming rush of scents and sounds. The wild was calling to her, loud and urgent. Yet still she looked back at Marcus, as if asking for confirmation. "You know where you belong," he whispered. "Go on." With one fluid motion, Nia stepped out. Her paws pressed into the earth like she had never left it. She sniffed the air, ears twitching, muscles quivering with readiness. Then, with a burst of sudden energy, she bounded a few feet into the tall grass, her limp barely visible, her tail flicking high. Marcus's chest tightened, torn between pride and loss. And then it happened. From the tree line at the far edge of the clearing, a shadow moved. Golden rosettes shimmered in the light. The tall, lithe shape of the Leopard Mother emerged with a grace that was both silent and commanding. Marcus's breath caught. "She came." Nia froze, every muscle alert. For a long heartbeat, mother and daughter stared across the clearing. The silence was electric, every rustle of grass magnified. Then came the sound, low, guttural, trembling with something deeper than instinct. A call. Nia responded instantly, a high-pitched chirp bursting from her throat. She ran, clumsy, joyous, reckless, across the clearing. The mother surged forward, and in the space between heartbeats they collided, rosettes against rosettes, a tangle of fur and sound and trembling limbs. The mother licked frantically, checking, grooming, pulling Nia against her chest. The cub pressed and climbed, burying herself in the warmth she had nearly lost. The air filled with cries, sharp, urgent, relieved. A language older than human words, the sound of something broken, stitching itself whole. Marcus staggered back a step, overwhelmed. His eyes blurred. He had imagined this moment, dreamed it, but the reality struck harder than anything he had known. Sarah's hand touched his shoulder lightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The reunion was chaotic, undignified, messy, and more beautiful than anything Marcus had seen in his decade in the wild. When at last the mother lifted her head, her amber eyes found Marcus across the clearing. Not soft, not submissive, but steady, knowing. For one breathless moment, man and predator stood bound by a truth neither could deny. She had entrusted him with her child, and he had given her back alive. The clearing grew quiet after the storm of reunion. Nia curled against her mother's chest, her small body shuddering with exhausted joy, while the older leopard licked her fur with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound was soft, rhythmic, like rain against dry earth. For Marcus, it was a hymn, a sound he knew he might never hear again. He stood motionless, afraid even to shift his weight, as though one careless movement might fracture the fragile miracle before him. Sarah stayed beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her face turned away so he wouldn't see the tears gathering in her eyes. Minutes stretched. The sun climbed higher, scattering golden light through the acacia trees. Then, with the suddenness of wild creatures, the mother rose. She nudged Nia gently, her muscles rolling with power as she guided the cub toward the tree line. Nia hesitated for a heartbeat, glancing back at Marcus with those fierce, amber eyes that had once been clouded by pain. Then she followed. The grass closed behind them, the rosetted coats melting into the savanna as if the earth itself had reclaimed them. Marcus's chest felt hollow. His hands itched to reach out, to hold on to something. But there was nothing left except the memory of spots in sunlight and the fading echo of soft chirps. They waited a long while in silence, neither he nor Sarah speaking. Finally, Sarah touched his arm. "It's time," she said gently. The drive back was heavy with quiet. Dust rose behind the tires, the landscape unrolling endlessly. A sea of grass, scattered thorn trees, sky stretching wider than any sorrow. Yet Marcus carried the silence like a stone in his chest. That night, alone in his hut, he left the door open as always. The oil lamp flickered low, casting small shadows across the wooden walls, but no amber eyes glowed in the darkness. No soft growl hummed from the porch, only the stillness of absence. At dawn, something pulled him outside. The earth was damp with dew, the horizon pale with new light. He stepped into the yard, scanning the brush out of habit, his heart clenching against hope he told himself he didn't have. Then he saw them, tracks, clear and fresh in the red dirt. A larger set, round, steady, and beside them, two smaller ones, clumsy and overlapping, a cub still learning her stride. They curved toward the hut, lingered near the porch, then veered back toward the wild. Marcus dropped to his knees, pressing his fingers into one of the smaller prints as though it might vanish. His throat burned. They had returned, not to stay, not to linger, but to leave a sign. It was enough, more than enough, because love, in the wild or in a human heart, didn't always mean possession. Sometimes it meant trust. Sometimes it meant letting go. And sometimes it meant nothing more and nothing less than leaving behind a trace that said, "We were here. We remember." As the sun lifted higher, painting the Mara in firelight, Marcus rose slowly. He looked toward the endless horizon, the place where rosettes had disappeared into grass, and whispered, "Run far, stay wild." And then he stepped back inside, the faint imprint of paws still fresh in the soil. The last gift of a bond that had crossed every boundary of fear, instinct, and species.